Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the fifth session of our Rev Up Digital series. Our topic today is BIM in a world of social distancing. And what an important and timely topic to discuss as our current global challenges are changing the way we collaborate and work together. I know all of you are very busy and have a ton of options to go to for content, so thank you for tuning in. My name is Luke Schauer. I am the Southwest Territory Manager at Revisto, and I'll be your host today, along with our Global Director of Customer Success, Brett Settles. Our guests today, two rock stars in the AEC industry, Brian Myers from Jacobs and Ramone Reynolds from Kapture Prefab. Glimpse at our agenda, we'll have a 1 hour session today. Brian Myers from Jacobs is going to kick us off with a case study, followed by Ramone Reynolds at Kapture Prefab. If you have any questions during their presentation, please send them through to us in the Q&A chat box. After the presentations, we'll go through and open it up for more broader roundtable type discussion. Again, so if anyone has any topics or questions, from people that are in the audience, please shoot them through that Q&A box and we'll try to bring them up in that discussion. If we have time at the end, we're going to run through a little teaser of our 5.0 build. So why use an integrated collaboration platform? Well, an ICP like Revisto makes them more accessible and actionable to all project stakeholders, regardless of skill set and the environment they work in. Whether it's in the office, in the field, or the manufacturing plant like Ramone will show. Brett gave an excellent in-depth explanation on what an ICP is in last week's webinar, session 4. So if you missed that, I would encourage you to go back and listen to that recording if you're interested in learning more about that. But for those of you who are unfamiliar with Revisto or new to this series, in short, Revisto provides a centralized location for project teams to view 2D sheets in the 3D model, as well as communicate issues, collaborate on them, track, and solve them. Ramone and Brian are going to help further bring to light in their presentations on why to use an ICP, especially in today's new normal of social distancing, and how a tool like Revisto kept some day-to-day business going as usual during this pandemic. So with that said, Brian, I'll let you take it away.
All right, thank you very much. Jacobs is one of the world's largest architecture and engineering companies. In fact, I think it is the world's largest combined architecture and engineering firm. And as a result of that, I plan on keeping everything that we do in the software at a fairly high level for this discussion, but feel free to ask in-depth questions as we go. And candidly, as far as Jacobs is concerned, we could probably do an entire podcast on nothing but how Revisto could be used within Jacobs. But all that being said, I'm Brian Myers. I am known by a wide variety of different titles, but BIM manager or digital delivery lead are two that I tend to most often go by. And I work out of our Jacobs St. Louis office, and the St. Louis office does a wide range of different kinds of work, from water treatment plants to the design of roads, to the design of bridges, to an area that's really my own specialty, which is the design of buildings and building complexes. My own role actually inside of the Jacobs environment entails overseeing the implementation of best practices around the digital design across the local design practice. And as you can see here, Revisto is rapidly being adopted in Jacobs by our project partners. May that be, and when we say our project partners, in some cases, it absolutely is people that are outside of the Jacobs ecosystem. They could be our subcontractors on construction projects. In this case, you can see that we do a wide variety of different kinds of building types or project types, including government facilities, airports, commercial projects, and medical facilities. And you can keep it at this slide for a little while. why this is important is that because Jacobs is so big, we have a tendency to have projects that span multiple different offices. So we may have a project that's being worked on in Arlington at the same time it's being worked on in St. Louis, and at the same time we have another group of individuals that are working on it over in our Irvine office. So even if we weren't in a world where there's a pandemic going on, the ability to work remotely inside of the software is vastly important to the way that we work inside of Jacobs, because it allows us to work between our offices, which in many cases are spanning distances of thousands of miles. One other thing that I'll add is that we also have offices in Australia. We have offices in Poland and other places in Europe. So one of the things that we can do with Revisto if we want to is actually communicate with project teams that are in different time zones when working with projects. And you can go ahead and go to the next slide. Oh, actually, I'm sorry. You can go back up one again. Sorry. Let me see here. One of the things that I really like about using Revisto is the construction process. Even though my own office tends to be focused on design, the construction process and the software is really just maybe a marriage made in heaven is a little bit too strong, but they really work well together. The reasoning behind that is that it means that you can communicate with people like your subcontractors, your people that are on the design teams, and have them collaborate amongst each other, even though they work in different offices, maybe in the same city or across the country or across the world. Currently in my own office, we're using Revisto for mostly for government work. And when I say government work, it tends to be government buildings, building facilities. But as time moves on, we will be moving into other kinds of areas. Our own office will definitely be using Revisto for medical facilities, and the coordination of staff that have whether it be architecture, interiors, whatever, that are designing those for the medical facilities. And I do know that within the Jacobs environment, we have had projects that have used the software before for hospitals. But of course, as you can see there, it's been used on airports. Our team has used it on the airport in Denver, which is an absolute massive airport for those of you that are familiar with it. And of course, we've used it on various commercial projects as well. I'll also mention one last thing, and that is that in my previous life, I've worked at Jacobs for just over 2 years now, but at my previous company, I really wished that I had had this tool, because at that company, I was the BIM manager for a general contractor, and we built hospitals. And one of the advantages to using a program like this in the hospital construction world is that you have your subcontractors who are going through fabrication processes, all that kind of good stuff, and you need to be able to bring their models together. And by bringing their models together, you then can take a look at the different situations as far as the clashes that have taken place inside of those models, how the different teams maybe have not been communicating quite as well as what they should have, and as a result of that, they're both taking up the same space. Programs like this help document exactly what those conditions are, and then we can assign those conditions to individuals or different companies so that they can then go in and make the changes so that each of these different design teams can stay coordinated. You can go to the next slide now. All right. Now, what we're looking at here is actually a slide of how we're using it on one of our current government projects. And what you can see here is that we have pipes that are conflicting with walls and structural members. And it's a really good example of, just a typical thing that you'll see on a project. Now, I would imagine that the vast majority of people that are probably watching this have probably either had a chance to maybe see a picture of Revisto or have had a chance to use it for a while. Our own process is to take these different models, bring them into Navisworks, and they can be different models from different kinds of software. Then once we have them inside of the Navisworks environment, then we'll do our clash tests inside of Navisworks. Then from Navisworks, we'll bring those clashes into Revisto, which you can start to see over there on the right-hand side. Then we will assign those various different clash conditions to either various departments or to various individuals so that they can then start to address those issues. Now, one of the beautiful things about this is that let's say that we have a project that eventually gets set on the shelf after 30% or just a little bit beyond that. And whenever we're talking about just setting a project on the shelf, if you're not familiar with that term, what it means is that we perhaps we have a project where they're not sure if they want to continue the project, so it gets put on hold for a while. Or maybe they're trying to get additional funding for the project, so it gets put on hold for a while. Well, inside of the Revisto, what we can do is that we can actually mark up our individual views with the comments that we have of the problems that we're seeing in the design as of that point in the design process. Because we're then marking it up and it's being saved in essentially a big database, then what that allows us to do is 5 months later, 6 months later, while we haven't had to do this yet, it could be a year and a half later, open up the project, take a look at the markups that have been done as of that point, and be able to either refresh ourselves on what things still needed to be changed when we put a stop to the project, or if we've even passed it off to a different project team in another office, they can then open it up, take a look at those markups, get an idea what the original design team saw, and begin to address those issues as the project begins to move forward. In summary, one of the ways that Jacobs actually ends up using the software is that we really use it on a wide variety of different projects and project types. And I could do nothing but talk about different kinds of project types that we use it on for probably a good couple of hours if I had to. But it's used in various offices across the country, and it's getting adopted more and more across those different offices in the Jacobs ecosystem. And the reason why it's important in today's environment, and when I say in today's environment, that could either be because we're working remotely, intentionally working remotely, or because maybe your area is currently quarantined, you can only go so many places, is because it does allow you to collaborate. It does make these conversations much easier. And in the case of project teams that are maybe working overseas, and right now I have a project that's actually in Korea that's coming to my mind right now, actually, as well as a project in Hawaii that's coming to my mind right now. Using a tool like this is vital because our project teams work at different times of the day. And this allows us to exchange information, exchange ideas between those different project teams in different time zones that otherwise would have a very difficult time in being able to collaborate without having meetings at 8 o'clock at night or 1 o'clock in the morning their time. So those are just some of the reasons why we're using the software inside of the Jacobs environment.
Awesome. Thank you, Brian. Does anyone have any questions from the audience? Want to jump in and say here? If not, we'll move over to Ramone and we can jump back to it at the end of his. Looks like we do not. So, Ramone, I'm going to pass this over to you now. Let you get started.
Hey everyone, happy Thursday. My name is Ramone Reynolds. I am the design director over at Kapture Prefab. Kapture Prefab is a prefab facility that creates exterior wall panels that allows you to get to building closure a lot quicker. One of the things that we include in our wall panel systems are a cold form steel system that has exterior cladding and metal panel finishes, as well as eaves finishes. A little bit about myself. I've been in the industry for roughly 8 years. I have a background in drafting and design, as well as construction management, and a degree in business. So we're looking at this pandemic, looking at the world of social distancing now, as is. How did Kapture Prefab adjust their process and their workflow to accommodate for that? One of the biggest things that we found, or the three biggest things that we found, was it impacted our communication, the way that we are educating our staff here at Kapture, and our workflows. We're looking at communication. You know, it helped us to understand our customer a lot better, like who is our customer? And when going through our communication, how is that customer interpreting that communication? Also, it showed me never to assume, and it also brought light to our team to never to assume. And then establishing key points of contact when implementing this in a manufacturing process. Other things was training, visual aids, learning styles. How can we implement a system to educate our factory floor, train them, and give them visual aids to utilize Revisto a lot easier and a lot smoother. And then we had to make some adjustments to our workflow due to the social restraints. So what's the expectation, what's the scope, and then how are we all aligning, and what's the buy-off between each and every group within Kapture. Next slide, please. First, I need you guys to understand the workflow. So I just did a quick overview, a quick snapshot of our workflow. Where we're going to start off is looking at our 50% SD drawings. We're looking at panel sizing, repeatability, returns, joints, our edge of slab plans, and how can we make a building manufacturable. Now, we take the construction documents and we place them up on Revisto, while also taking our design for manufacturing rule set. And we're doing a complete model audit from about roughly 75% SDs all the way off into our start of fabrication, where we have all of our teams, construction, we have our manufacturing facility, we have our design leads, our project managers, all in one room, and we are working through and marking up comments on individual computers. And we're just going through and just getting as much information into our models before we start our fabrication process. From that, we are then creating and producing our fabrication tickets, our finish tickets, our elevations, details, phasing maps, lifting plans, and alignment plans to then push out to our manufacturing floor. Next slide, please. One way that we utilize, or one way that we delegate work amongst groups is this matrix here, which is technically our responsibility matrix, but we call it our design matrix. But we're trying to understand all the information that's coming in and how do we decipher and delegate all of this work. So we start off with our process data, our product data, and then we go into our finished data. We understand everything that's going to be within that wall system. From that, we look at our key design parameters. We then start to kind of build a mock-up to look at lessons learned and see if we're meeting our manufacturability and our constructability requirements. We start to produce our panel tickets, and then we go into our install sequencing. Next slide, please. This is kind of a quick snapshot of our design for manufacturing rule sets. I just wanted to kind of give you an overview of kind of some of the rules that we are dumping into our models and feeding back to our design teams as we're developing our models. Next slide, please. So now this kind of leads into our Revisto workflow. I just kind of wanted to give you an idea of our process first and then how we utilize Revisto. So the first thing that we do is we take our third-party models and we start to produce those fabrication tickets. Once those fabrication tickets are produced, we have our design teams then going, updating our drawings to our manufacturing rule sets, and we're going through our review cycle 1. So in our review cycle 1, the drawings are really extremely preliminary. They're a rough preliminary set of drawings. In that rough preliminary set of drawings, we're going through and we are allowing our factory floor to get an idea of what we're building. We're looking at the major footprint of the building. We're looking at, you know, how well does this building meet our requirements for shipping and logistics and all different things like that. And we are dubbing it into our review process 1, which then leads us into review process 2, which are picking up a lot of the comments and the feedback from review 1. Then we are jumping into review 3, which we should have roughly 90% of our comments picked up between our design for manufacturing rule sets, wall panel breaks, each and every review cycle. Once we're done with that, we have final completion and stamp off of our production drawings, which then leads us out to production. So with all this is happening in Revisto, we have all of our files named, archiving, we're going through and we're making sure that all of our up-to-date drawing sets are there. We have our design leads moving it from one folder to another. You know, we have clean handoffs and we make sure that we have clean sign-offs within the whole process. So nothing's left for questioning, nothing's left for interpretation. We want to make sure that they have the most accurate information on the factory floor all the time. Next slide, please. So this is a sample of one of our first initial shop tickets. As you can see, some of the markups that they have on them. Some of them are minor. Some of them, you know, we can definitely like go through our whole drawing set and scrub it out and make sure that we have all the correct information inside of it. So as you can see, they want to add a detail sheet or details to this actual drawing set. Some of the callouts are incorrect. They want the dimensioning moved. They want to add information in the bill of materials. So this is like our first draft of our fabrication ticket. So this is review 1. So go to the next slide. You can see everything that we need on a panel ticket to then give to our factory floor, right? So now you see all the details, every single detail associated with this wall panel in one snapshot on one drawing. You also see all of the finished colors. You see dimensioning consistency. You see all the bill of materials. And then in the upper corner, you can see our sign off. You can see our design lead and our QA signed up on the drawings. So this is our approved set, which will then be released out to our factory floor. And go to the next slide, please. So here's a snapshot or a review of our factory floor. The red locations are what we call our BIM stations. Our BIM stations are pretty much a computer with a TV monitor inside of a metal cabinet. A couple of big issues that we kind of didn't see when looking at placing these BIM stations out on our factory floor was craftsman versus technology. And what that means to me is how are we teaching or training our factory production workers technology as well as implementing this new software tool being Revisto. A lot of our factory floor was not savvy in using like anything technical. So, you know, can you use your cell phone? No. Can you use your laptops? No. So we have to train them up on that piece first and then implement this new tool being Revisto. But the great thing about Revisto, it's an extremely user-friendly tool. And on the inside of that cabinet, we also created an educational piece, meaning a snapshot on how to navigate Revisto, so that they can easily go in there, mark up comments, and supply feedback to us being design, and get that information turned around quickly so that it won't slow the process down to each and every line. So if 5 minutes is wasted on line 1 in that first station, then that 5 minutes trickles into something bigger once it gets to the very end of that production floor. So how do we reduce that? Putting these BIM stations on the factory floor actually helped us reduce our comments back from the factory floor to design and to design back to our factory floor. So we are able to get real-time comments on our factory floor utilizing Revisto. We also have design leads on the factory floor that has tablets with Revisto installed where they can take pictures and they can mark up and send stuff back to us right away. With that, we were able to actually gain some efficiency in our line process time so that we can meet our building enclosure timelines a lot faster. I think that covers everything. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, Ramone. Awesome job. Anyone have any questions for Ramone or for Brian about their presentations? Please shoot them in that Q&A really quick. Or if you have any other topics that you want to talk about or would like us to discuss here in a few minutes, maybe aside from their presentation. In the meantime, just a few announcements before we kind of jump into that roundtable discussion. We are offering a free 30-day trial, unlimited users for 30 days. The cutoff for that is May 20th, so we have just about a week if you wanted to start something like that up. And for the rest of our Rev Up Digital series, we have 3 left. Next week, Better Way to Build, BIM Practices, Project Coordination, and Reality Capture and Remote Workflows. So, any other questions anyone has? I don't see any in the chat box right now that have not been answered. So, we kind of started off with a question. I guess it could be towards either one of you, whoever wants to take it. You know, there's been a lot that's changed here in the last few months. What would you say, maybe Brian, you can answer this one. What would be the biggest lesson you've learned over the last few months during this pandemic?
Well, one of the most interesting things, in my opinion, is that before we were always really just based in our offices. And right now in Jacobs, they've actually, for the most part, mandated that we are going to be working at home. And I know that that's probably true of probably at least half of the people that are listening right now. And the first week or two, we ended up having issues with people just not having fast enough internet connections, or people that didn't have experience in how to check out a license of software or something along those lines. And those really aren't issues that we've had with Revisto. And the reasoning is that it's not like it takes a tremendous amount of bandwidth really to run it. It's kind of up on your screen and there it is. And as far as marking up the plans and that sort of thing, you can still do that thing. And you can also review plans remotely very easily. And you can start to review the markups that other people have had. As far as changes for me personally, and it kind of relates to what I was just saying, it's that I'm always one of those people that's always been an early riser going into the office. And as an early riser, I mean that I'm usually here at 6 o'clock in the morning. And the end of my day is around 4 o'clock. And people sort of got used to that in my production environment. So they would usually ask me questions before the end of the day. But now you have their families surrounding them at home. And you know that instead of taking educational opportunities over lunch hours, they're now making food for their kids, that sort of thing. So Instead, people are now starting to actually slide their hours all over the place. You have people that never used to work early that are now working early. People that never used to be working at 9 o'clock at night that are now working at 9 o'clock at night. And any sort of collaboration tool that allows us to still collaborate with one another, even though our schedules are not the same, is just of tremendous benefit. And I'll finish up by saying that anything that we can run on our systems at home, within reason, no matter how the internet speed is going to end up being, can end up being a benefit to us. While we still have to load some models over our internet, it really hasn't been a problem for us like it has been with some of our design tools like Revit, which are just bandwidth hogs and just, at times have seemed to be almost crippling on some projects. So we've had to adjust the way that we've worked inside of those. But that hasn't necessarily been the case here with the way that we've always used the software, because it really hasn't changed our workflow that much.
Yeah. Awesome. Yeah. Oh, go ahead, Brett.
Oh, sorry. I was just going to touch on this, and Brian can actually relate to this really well because we did this together. But the thing is a lot of what people are experiencing now with staying at home, getting information back and forth to these remote locations is something that a lot of international companies already have experience with, right? And I think that the scheduling thing is a great point. And I think the communication factor thing is a great point because, and Brian can probably recall, when you're working with people in India who are literally on the other side of the planet, what happens is instead of having an actual dialogue back and forth, you get an info drop at one point in the day, and you get an info drop at another point in the day. And there's really only 2 points where these people communicate, especially when you have to get large amounts of data and information back and forth. And I think Brian hit it on the head when he says that whenever you can melt away some of the problems that schedules create, it really, really solves a lot of problems that people are facing with the current situation.
Yeah, absolutely, Brett. Ramone, do you have anything to add to that topic? Any big lessons learned over the past few months?
Yeah, for us, one of the biggest lessons learned was just the way that we coordinated with our factory floor and our manufacturing plant. Again, like they, a lot of the times they would come in from, the line, and they will stop the line to come and coordinate with a designer. With that, us implementing, Revisto, it did two things. It actually increased our social distancing between, offices and our factory team. And it also helped enhance just the way that we communicated. It made it a lot easier. Like everything was documented. It was just simple. The whole process was simple. So that's the only add that I have.
Awesome. I don't see anything else from the audience here. So I guess another question I have is, I wanted to bring up coordination meetings and how have you seen things change over the past few months as far as coordination meetings go? What's changed? What's still the same? Especially with everyone doing the social distancing thing.
Well, I think the most obvious thing is that people can no longer really get together in the same job trailer and try to beat these things out, particularly if we're talking about the construction of buildings. I know historically on a lot of the projects that I've worked on the construction side of things, we would all get together in this tight little job trailer with these tiny, fairly narrow tables, sit around the table, and then talk to one another about progress issues, all looking up at a monitor, that sort of thing. And while theoretically you can still do that, and I realize that the world of construction isn't necessarily tied to some of the restrictions, particularly in the United States, where we can still do construction projects. But what this allows us to do, though, is be able to communicate more efficiently, once again, remotely, without necessarily sitting around the table for maybe as many meetings. So in that regard, I think that anything that can actually help with that separation is very much a good thing.
Yeah, I totally agree. That awesome point. Ramone, I know you guys are doing quite a bit. What have things have changed? How has things changed for you, I suppose? Any kind of input on that?
Not so much. It hasn't changed a whole lot. I think some of our processes are still similar. Even during this pandemic, I think the only thing that's really changed is just the way that we spread out our teams. That's all I really have to add to that.
I actually had a question for you, Ramone. I noticed that you decided to use this over something like Bluebeam, and I can think of a few reasons why you would use this over Bluebeam, but I was wondering if you had any thoughts on why you would use this over Bluebeam in the process that you do typically.
Yeah. So the great thing about using Revisto, again, like it's an easy platform to use. And the main thing that we wanted to do was take our groups just completely paperless. And then another reason is just the user friendliness of Revisto. Our teams, not coming from a background of like technology or using many like technical platforms, I think Revisto was the easiest platform that we can use to get implemented, and them not our teams not being so overwhelmed with us implementing a new platform. I think that Bluebeam has a lot of detail that like you have to go in depth when it comes to like a lot of the training behind Bluebeam, which is a strong platform. But this just made it extremely easier. It was easy, like click here, and then we were able also to make, custom stamps and, custom things to make their process a lot easier. So it was a lot easier to implement for our groups who don't come up from a background of technology.
And that's actually what I ended up getting out of your presentation as I was listening to you speak, is I was actually thinking about on the design side of things where right now we actually do a lot of work in Bluebeam, and we have the Bluebeam sessions. And it got my brain thinking about how we could start to leverage that amongst our designers just by basically publishing the sheets and then being able to do the markups directly in a platform like Revisto in order to be able to streamline this a little bit better in our current environment than what we've been doing in Bluebeam. So it's going to be definitely something that we'll need to take a look at as well.
Yeah, another thing that I'd like to bring up, and this isn't really specific to Revisto, and it's something that I touched on last week for anybody that was in here last week, is that a big part of making not only learning effective at a distance, but also productivity at a distance is always going to be that interactivity, right? If people are logging into any tool, regardless if it's an authoring tool, a reporting tool, a timesheet app, it could be anything, and they see that it's a barren wasteland with no new information, no users, anything like that, they start to kind of back away from it because they don't feel like it's being used or taken seriously or anything like that. One of the biggest successes that we've seen with Revisto, not only with the current pandemic, but everything before that, is simply because there is activity. There is the ability to jump in there and get a good grip on what's been happening in the last half day or anything like that. And right now, especially, it's important because that interactivity is what keeps people moving on these items here. One of the big things that I hear about our software all the time is the fact that it's very kind of ball and court based. And what I mean by that is that it's not a situation where a markup is created and then that markup gets put into a list of 1,000 other markups with no intention of who's going to complete it, what the communication up until that point about the markup has been, or anything like that. It's always contextually based, which means that every issue, every markup has a history, has a point, and has a direction in which people can kind of pick up that ball and move with it. One of the biggest drawbacks when working in the office with technology and something is what I like to call shoulder tapping. People that know what I'm talking about, hold on one second. I lost internet for a second, but I'm back. One of the things that people do not have the ability to do anymore, employees that are not technically savvy or shop room, is that they no longer can walk over to somebody who is adept with the technology. So first of all, when we're talking about shoulder tapping, one thing I want to say is let's never. That is still a very time-wasting activity to be doing, because not only are you taking time out of the person who's tapping their day, but you're also taking time out of that person that has to respond to that. And getting people adept with technology is going to cut down on those microtransactions, and they're very, very hard to quantify, right? We've seen pitches before in the past with software companies where it's like, hey, if you saved 1.5 seconds 20 times a day over the course of 365 days a year, you're going to save this amount of money. While I don't find some of those sales pitches very effective, they're absolutely true, right? So anytime that you can get the context into the hands of the right person at the right time, that's just going to cut down on the amount of exchanges that need to take place to get from point A to point B. So really, one of my bigger points around this topic is that because it's real time, because it's interactive, and because it's all inclusive, really, really helps with the adoption of it over something that's more siloed or unorganized.
Yeah, great point, Brett.